Reflections. Hiya Monstaz, and thanks for stopping by. Boy, it's been some hot nights, hasn't it? The summer is surely coming in strong. Thank goodness I have my high C orange lava burst drink right here. It's rather thirst quenching. Well, anywho Monstaz, we have 3 scary stories to share with you tonight. Now these stories are creepypastas that happen to be 3 of my favorite, so I hope you enjoy them, and big shouts out to all of you monsters out there. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you consider it and hit the subscribe button below. Alright monsters, get your high C drinks ready and let the stories begin. The Clown, the Paint, and the Turbines. Written by Elliot Cowling. What I experienced in that place I will never ever forget. You must listen to this to learn about the thing I saw and why you should be careful out there in the dark world. My life was traumatized by this event. I feel telling about it will help me to release some of the dreadful memories of what happened. But my poor family. Back when I was younger, my family purchased a beautiful home in what seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. It was cheap and only 5 miles away from my school, or so it said. It was marvelous. I could remember all those times I used to play down in the garden with my toys and just think about how great life was. Well, school was a drag obviously, but the idea that this place was my playground was amazing. I was a only child, so I really had to invent some games to keep me amused when my parents went out. My life was brilliant. Every day after school, I would come home, rush outside, and then go into my own world for hours. Life was amazing. However, there were 2 questions that started to bug me after a long time. The first one was that my parents never allowed me to go in their room, and they would always keep the door firmly shut. It never really bothered me at the start of living in this place. But then I realized that the whole thing was, well, odd. The second question is this. There were fields that backed onto our back garden. These fields were full of wind turbines, lots of them. I didn't quite understand what they were back then. It was a while ago. Let's just say that the turbines seemed to go for miles. They made me feel very weak and vulnerable. They seemed to stare at you, with their arms spinning round and round all day long. I was told never to go into those fields. It wasn't because of the turbines. Oh no. It was because of the figure that stood still in the distance all day and all night long. Who the heck was it? One day, my mom went into town and she left me all alone in our labyrinth of a house. Let's just say I was irresponsible. I was only 9 years old. My dad was at work, so he couldn't look after me. Anyway, I just accepted it and she drove off. I was very happy to be alone. I could play my own games in the house and no one could stop me. I was ecstatic. I trotted out to the back garden and the turbines stared at me, inviting me into the fields where they worked and rested. I couldn't resist. No one was here to tell me off, so I could get away with it. I slowly walked across my garden, kicking any toys out of the way. My mind began to buzz and invent stories. I looked left to right, and then turned around to see if anybody could see me. I proceeded towards the garden fence, and into the field. I climbed over the fence with a struggle, like an old man getting up from his seat. Well, I managed to get over the wooden fence, and I just looked up in awe at the sight of these things. Then I looked down and noticed the figure. They were very far away, but my parents knew something that I did not about the whole thing. After checking if anyone was watching again, I began to walk across the fields. I kept my eye on the figure. I didn't feel too afraid as I continued to wander past the turbines, but I thought I should turn back. I didn't want to be in this field anymore. Not because I was afraid this time. Usually I disliked turbines. This time I was bored. What was the point of it all? How did my parents know this thing wasn't a statue or something? They just assumed it was something bad to scare me from wandering off from the house. Every child should explore. It's part of growing up. I began to turn back, but as I did, the sky suddenly turned dark. Very dark. A storm cloud must have arrived. Great. Now I would be soaking wet and I would be caught by my parents. And I started to run back to the house. But something didn't feel right. My whole body began to feel almost tingly, like an icy chill. I put it down to the cold weather that had just arrived. I ran back to the house and took a quick glance back at the field. That's when I noticed it. The figure's head had moved. I thought nothing of it at the time, but I also ran inside and I began to come to terms with what I just noticed. I ran up to my bedroom and barged into my door opening. My bedroom looked out onto the fields, you see, and I looked out the window and realized that it had moved. The figure was now looking at the house. It must have always been like that, I thought. I spent the rest of the evening contemplating everything that had happened in that field. What was that thing? It had to be a person. Maybe they were stuck. If they were, though, they would be calling out for help, surely. Well, I went to bed that night feeling a little odd. Not afraid, just uneasy. But the next day my mom went out again, and she gave me the option to stay at home or go with her. Was I gonna go with her? No, of course not. I stayed at home and went back to the fields with a feeling of dread in my stomach. I didn't know why. This person seemed lonely. I needed to ask them what they were doing. I plucked up some courage and began walking. I didn't blink. I just kept my eyes on the figure for the entirety of the walk. They were definitely looking at me, without a doubt. I tried waving at them, but in turn, I received no gesture back. As I kept wandering closer, I noticed the clothes the figure was wearing. Now, the majority of the figure's clothing was red. The figure wore a hat with a white feather on top. Even his shoes were red. I could make out a face now. They had a red, bulbous nose. The bottom half of their face was painted blue. It appeared their lips were painted white. This person was a clown. What would a clown be doing in the middle of a field staring at my house? Hello, I called. No response. I stood at a fair distance to the clown. The person was certainly a man. I kept calling the clown. No response still. What are you doing here? I asked. And suddenly the clown blinked and lifted his head up a little. I stood back a little. Can you hear me? I asked. You should turn back. The clown finally responded. What's your name? I kept questioning him. Oh, it doesn't matter what my name is. I'm here because I want to be here. I live here, child. The clown responded. I live here actually, I said, reassuring him. No? I live here. You, disturb me. And those who disturb me help me paint, he said suspiciously. I was very confused at that last part. Help him paint? Help him paint what? What do you mean? I'm gonna tell my mom about this, I said with a childish authority. Well, of course I thought I was right. I was a child. I was boss of this conversation. Well, so I thought. Your mother will refuse to believe you, boy. She's merely a cold-hearted woman. She has seen me. Why do you think she doesn't want you to come down here? She knows me. I warned her. I really did. I was listening intently. My mom had been here? That's why she was telling me to stay away? No, it can't be. This is just my dad dressed up, I thought. I thought it was some cruel joke to keep me away from this field. Stop playing around, Dad, I shouted. You think your daddy will come and save you? No, he won't. You see, your parents, they leave you alone a lot, don't they? You know what I mean? You are always left in that house. Why is that? I told them. I warned them. Oh, they're scared. They're scared of me. You see, boy? They've been waiting for a while now. When they're out, I'm about. Well, how do you know they've been leaving me alone? Who are ya? I shouted. Your worst nightmare. I had enough. I turned around and I sprinted as fast as I could. I ran and ran and ran for what seemed like ages. I looked behind me. He was gone. I charged back into the house. My parents weren't home. The sky was so dark. It was 7:00 p.m. Mom and Dad should be home soon, I thought. I burst into tears and went to the phone. The phone was smashed to pieces. Someone must have been in the house. Oh no, it can't be. I had to get out of the house. I was in floods of tears and my burning eyes kept blurring up. I rubbed them viciously and I repeatedly tried to open the front door. It wasn't having it. I kept tugging at the door, but nothing. That's when I stopped for a few seconds. If this thing wants my parents out of the house, for whatever reason, is it something to do with their room? I tried to shake away the thought, but it kept clouding my mind. They allowed me in their room in the last house. Well, why not this one? I had to find out what was going on. I heard noises coming from the kitchen. Wiping away my tears, I charged upstairs and burst into my mom's room without even thinking a thing. Once the door had smashed into the wall next to it, I stood there in silence. I don't even want to tell you what I saw, but hanging from the ceiling was my dad. 3 chains emerged from the ceiling, each one dug into his back, blood still dripping from his lifeless body. I vomited. I kept throwing up every time I looked at the thing. The walls were covered in writing. After darting my eyes away from the body several times, I noticed that the writing all said the same thing: sacrifice. Suddenly, the doorway filled with red. It was him, the clown. I screamed as he walked closer and closer towards me. He held a paintbrush in his left hand and a paint pot in his right. I told you, he said. He lunges towards me. The paint pot came towards my head. Well, I screamed and covered my eyes and then, well, it woke up. This seems like a stupid plot twist, doesn't it? It's not. Please, keep listening. You have to find out the truth. It was a dream, and it was early morning. I had dreamt the entire ordeal, not moving to the house, obviously, but the clown and the room and everything to do with that horrid field. I slowly wandered downstairs, gripping my head. It hurt really bad. I must have been thrashing around at night because of the nightmare and hit my head. I felt so sick because of what I just witnessed in my dream. Maybe I was coming down with an illness, but not again. I called for my parents. No answer. They must be outside. I went to the back door, opened it, and hobbled outside. I called again. Still no answer. I wandered to the edge of the garden to see if they were out in the field. I saw something in the distance. I thought it was them. Well, I called out and the figure looked at me and waved. I was happy knowing that my parents were safe and sound, and that I was going to be alright. The turbines weren't spinning that morning. I spent the rest of the morning inside watching TV. I didn't bother looking out the window to see where they were. I was too involved in watching cartoons to even remember to check. By 4:00 p.m., they still hadn't returned to the house. Well, I went outside to go look for them, and that's when I stopped dead in the middle of the garden. One of the turbines was red. I looked up at it and screamed in horror. At the end of the 2 of the arms of the turbine, there were bodies spinning round and round. The figure in the distance began to wave at me again. Oh no, it couldn't be. That was no dream. I was knocked out. The paint pot gave me the injury on my head. That's when I noticed the writing on the fence. The writing that wasn't there earlier. The very words that have made me suffer for countless years now. Thanks for helping me paint. The theater. Have you ever heard of an old PC game called The Theater? Yeah, I didn't think so. Probably because many people say it doesn't even exist. You see, The Theater is an old computer game released around the same time as Doom. Today, if you were to ever find it, it's only available on crappy bootleg CD-ROMs, which, more often than not, don't even actually contain the game. The actual legitimate copies that they say were released back in the day feature a blank cover with nothing but a picture of what has since been named the Ticket Taker. He is simply a poorly drawn, pixelated, bald white man with large red lips, wearing a red vest over a white shirt and black pants. He is completely emotionless, though some say that if you smash the disc, his face is shown as angry the next time you look at the cover, though this is just dismissed as an urban legend. What is peculiar about the Theater, though, is that there is no developer named on the jewel case, nor is there any game description on the back. It is simply the Ticket Taker in front of a white backdrop on both sides. The game was initially known for its inability to install correctly. The installation process immediately locks up the computer when the user reaches the licensing agreement. Another strange thing about the licensing agreement for the Theater is that whenever the development studio is supposed to be named, the text is simply a blank line. Most people who have claimed to own one of the original CDs say that they figured out how to install the game by simply rebooting their computer on the licensing agreement with the disc still inside. Then they were prompted to press "I agree" on startup, and it continued with the installation. The game then starts up without any introduction besides a main menu that is simply a movie theater's exterior on an empty city street. The title fades in, and then the three menu buttons appear: New Game, Load, and Options. Selecting Options immediately crashes the game to the desktop. Load is said to not function at all. Even if you do have a saved game, nothing happens when you press it. Thus, New Game is the only working menu option. Once it is selected, you are in first-person view. You are standing in an empty movie theater lobby, with the exceptions of the Ticket Taker, standing in front of a dark hallway, which one can only assume leads to the theater themselves. There's nothing to do but look at the poorly drawn, mostly illegible movie posters on, or approach the Ticket Taker. Once the player moves towards the Ticket Taker, a very low quality sound clip plays saying, "Thank you, please enjoy the movie," along with the speech box saying the same thing. You then walk into the hallway, and the screen fades to black, and you're back in the empty lobby, and you do the exact same thing again and again and again. While this may sound like a really horrible game, a number of peculiar things occur as you continue to play it. The number of times that you have to continue into the hall after giving your ticket to the Ticket Taker before the strange events happen is unknown. Most state that it's completely random and can take anywhere from the first playthrough to the 400th. What happens though has deeply disturbed some players. The first occurrence is when the player fades back in after walking into the hallway. This time they'll notice the Ticket Taker is completely absent. The player then, without any other options, decides to walk into the dark hallway. The sound clip and text box mentioned previously still play in the absence of the Ticket Taker. But when the player walks into the hallways, the screen doesn't fade out. It goes pitch black as they walk deeper into the hall. But the player's footstep sound clip is still playing as they continue to push the up button on the keyboard. Those claiming to have played the original game report to have felt extremely uncomfortable walking down the hallway, anticipating the whole way something horrible happening. Well, eventually, the player is unable to move forward. There is nothing for a few moments before a strange figure appears and stands before the player. It is described as Swirly Head Man. The original players of the game say their bodies immediately froze up and their stomachs churned as they saw this figure. Nothing happens as the Swirly Head Man stands before them. Then suddenly a piercing screech plays as the game glitches out. This lasts for a few minutes, with the screeching being continuous. Then the player is abruptly returned to the lobby, with all the sounds and graphics being as they should be. The game continues normally for the next couple of cycles of entering the hallway, with a couple of original players claiming the swirly head man would briefly appear and disappear in the corner of the screen as a brisk "yup" sound effects play. Then, at some point after meeting the swirly head man, the players see the ticket taker pacing back and forth. Though there is no walking animation, his limbs are completely static, so he just hops up and down slightly as a substitute, with his eyes being wide and his mouth open to simulate a worried facial expression. Some players noticed that the movie posters had been replaced with images of the swirly head man, which caused them to immediately turn away from the posters and approach the ticket taker. Then another, different, low-quality sound clip plays, but the speech box continues nothing but corrupted characters that cause whatever text that would have been in the box to completely be unreadable. Then another, different, low-quality sound clip plays, but the speech box contains nothing but corrupted characters that cause whatever text that would be in the box to be completely unreadable. Due to the extremely low quality of the sound, it is debated by players what exactly the ticket taker says at this point, though it is widely agreed that he says, "Never reach the other levels." Then the screen fades out once again and returns the player back to their starting point in the lobby, but the ticket taker is gone, and the hallway is blocked by a large brick wall. Touching the brick wall will immediately crash the game, and that's all there is to it. No one knows what the other levels are or how to gain access to them, nor is it known why the swirly head man causes such acute fear in those who have seen him in the game. All the original copies of the theater have either been lost or destroyed, but the creepiest part is the fact that all the original players of the game claim that, in their daily life, they will occasionally see a brief glimpse of the swirly head man out of the corner of their eyes. Whimsywood, written by Slime Beast. I always hated road trips. Well, I'm not using the term hate lightly. I've always absolutely hated long car rides, especially as a child. The hours on end spent cramped in the back of a vehicle drove me to the brink of adolescent madness. The sound of the road seemed always just loud enough to make it impossible to carry on a conversation with my parents up front. That's how desperate I'd get for any kind of break from the monotony. I'd casually wish I could hear my parents. Sometimes my mom would try to make the trips a little less unbearable for both of us. She'd buy a stack of comic books or a couple of new action figures and hide them until the dreaded day would arrive. Well, naturally, I knew about them and would usually end up looking at them beforehand, completely sabotaging the attempt. I guess I've just always hated waiting, really. I'm gonna tell you about one of these trips. The most mind-numbingly boring trip yet, from my home in New York to my grandparents' house in Arizona. Yes, we drove to Arizona, and I had already read all the comics a day earlier. We stopped at a couple of hotels for the night along the way, and I got to stretch my legs in school playgrounds if we happened to pass one when it was closed. But the majority of the time, days straight, was spent seated upright, seatbelt on, enveloped in the unforgiving drone of tires on pavement. I don't even know what state we were in when I saw the first billboard. It was weather-worn, paint peeling, almost covered by overgrown trees. Something largely unremarkable except for the image it offered. Whimsywood was written in multicolored balloon-like letters and set above an upturned head of a unicorn. As we whipped past the sign, I could barely catch the small text below the mythical creature's image. Games, rides, animals, family fun, 25 miles ahead. Mom? Mom! I shouted as loud as I could, overtaking the tire's drone by several octaves. Mom! Mom! Look, there's a park. She had seen it. They both had. My father, driving, took his eyes off the road for a split second as the two exchanged an unsure glance. It was a look I understood despite having never seen it before. They didn't want to stop there. Mom! I must have sounded incredibly pathetic, even though I wasn't trying, because she turned back with a smile. Okay, she said, if it's open, and we'll see how much it costs to get in. That was all I needed to hear. Now I was bouncing in my seat, utterly enthused. I just felt renewed, sharper, and more alert after the stagnation of endless highway. I watched the occasional car pass by, and looked into their windows whenever possible. I looked for another kid like me, maybe coming back from the park. If I saw one kid with a Whimsywood pennant or an oversized stuffed animal or even a simple smile on their face, I would just know the park was open. Every car that passed was empty, though, well, except for the grown-ups. But who cared about them? I tried to convince myself that the random sights on the side of the road were signs the park was indeed open. A soiled baby doll with a hole in his face, a colorful blanket fluttering in the branches of a dead tree, even a sock monkey reclining on the road's center divider line. There were enough children passing through to leave those signals, so I was more and more convinced that this was gonna be awesome. A second billboard whizzed past, the same Whimsywood logo, the same unicorn's head, and the same state of disrepair. Hanging off the billboard was a small wooden sign painted with red letters. Open. Mom! Dad! I know, I saw it. My dad turned to Mom again with a chuckle. Haha, well, I guess we're going, honey. The final Whimsywood sign stood at the end of a gravel driveway that trailed a long way off behind the tree line. The sign was much like the billboards, but despite being in better repair, it actually seemed even older. The lettering was hand-painted in an old-timey style, and the text beneath the unicorn head differed slightly. Games of chance, mechanical rides, rare animals, wholesome fun for Junior and Sis. Dad didn't really like the idea of taking the gravel stretch. He grumbled and complained the whole way down as the tires crunched stone and kicked things up under the undercarriage. I heard a few curse words in there, but all I cared about was the fast approaching fun. Past the trees, the Whimsywood Park was spectacular. On the drive-in, we were overlooking the entirety of the property. Several cleared acres with a short, long building essentially acting as the gateway between the downward sloping driveway and the gaming booths, petting zoo, and carnival rides towards the back. I was probably vibrating at a dangerous frequency at this point, like I was on the world's biggest sugar rush. Wow, Mom remarked. It's actually pretty nice. Dad started the car down the slope towards the parking lot with a deep sigh. The parking lot was about half filled with cars, which was probably a bit surprising to my parents. The minivans and station wagons scattered throughout the gravel expanse proved that, yes, Whimsywood was open. I didn't think anything of it, racing to the front doors of the building to see if they were locked. Hey, Dad called out as I bolted forward. I froze in place, thought about what I must have done wrong, and sheepishly made my way back to his side. Together, the three of us approached the building. More waiting. Dad pulled the door open and held it for Mom and I, well, me first of course. There was a wooden box by the front doors that simply read, "Pay what you can." $5 for everyone over 3 suggested. Well, I thought I saw my dad slip in a $10 bill and thought about protesting my age, but I was too excited to get inside. The interior of the building was dark, lit by rows upon rows of arcade game cabinets and neon signs that hung on the wall. The signs weren't for any specific products, but they were more along the lines of general concepts, like fun, goofy, and tubular, stuff like that. One that sticks out in mind just confusingly reads superpower. I hadn't really been to an arcade yet at the time, so this had my jaw dragging the floor. Now that we were indoors and there was no chance of getting back over by the van, I was free to run around like a lunatic. I was quickly lost amid the beeps and shrieks of computerized music of about 100 video games. I checked them all out. A centipede-like game called Skull and Crossbow caught my attention the most. It had a little boy with a crossbow at the bottom of the screen, firing up at skeletons and skulls rolling across a graveyard, inching closer and closer to him. I ran back to my parents and my mom already had a handful of quarters prepared for me. I played for a while, but couldn't get really far without dying. So that fun was over pretty quick. When I returned to my parents this time, they were talking to a third adult. She was a heavy-set woman with stringy black hair and nasty knit black dress clothes. She wore a unicorn horn on her forehead, attached with an elastic band.
"Well," Dad said to the round lady, here's the boy."
The way he said it was the same way as saying, "Okay, here's my way out of this conversation." The round lady turned and leaned down to face level to me. Her face was wrinkled, worn and old like the sign. She said hello to me with a large, yellowish smile and her breath smelled like urine. I didn't answer her. Instead, I grabbed onto my mom's leg. "Aw, he's shy," she explained. "It was nice talking to you." We quickly exited and walked to a large clearing behind the building. "Who was that?" I finally asked when we were out of earshot.
"She works here,"
Dad said flatly. He paused and added,
"Just couldn't get a word in."
We took a few steps before Mom and Dad exchanged the agitated look once again. For about 15 minutes, I ran from one attraction to the next as Dad constantly checked his watch. I didn't care. This was my one chance to actually enjoy myself. I wanted to take Dad's watch and smash it. I wanted to stay here, not go to stupid Arizona. The petting zoo had the usual fare: goats, chickens, and a heck of a lot of feces. An old man sat on a hay bale in the center of the petting zoo as other kids around my age harassed the birds and acted wary of the goats. The old man was dressed a lot like the round woman, right down to the plastic unicorn on his head. He smiled at me. After I did the customary amount of petting and stepping and crap, the old man beckoned me over. I kept a safe distance from him, but I did approach. As I stood a couple of feet from the old man, he cast his gaze down at the straw beneath his feet. I did the same. Then he swept a bit of straw aside. Just beneath was one of the chickens. It was motionless, its head twisted several times around. Jostled by an old man kicking the straw, a few maggots twisted and turned out of the creature's beak. I locked eyes with the old man, who was still smiling. "Shh, don't tell the other kids," he whispered. "They'll all want to see." He put his fingers to his leathery black speckled lips, as if to shush me. I always loved animals, and even if I hadn't, this would have still been disturbing. I ran back to my mom with such an awkward gait that she instinctively knew to knee down and catch me as I reached her. "What?" she asked. "What is it?" "There's a dead chicken." "Oh." "It was under the straw under that man." "Well, I'm sure he'll get rid of it. Sometimes animals get old and they pass on. Remember, we talked about that. As you no doubt already know, that wasn't the problem I was having with the whole situation. Still, I didn't really have the mental tools to figure out exactly how I should clarify the situation. I held hands with my mom and dad, almost hanging between them, as I decided what I wanted to do next in the park. That is when an announcement echoed through the park, carried by rattling tiny loudspeakers mounted on the telephone poles. "Wella, wella, wella, welcome, whimsy one wee ones. Hurry, hurry, hurry to Lumberjack's Timber Tunnel. All the little lumberjacks and lumberjills toddle on over to the tunnel and get ready to laugh." The announcer did a passable goofy impression mixed with the type of style of an ad for a monster truck rally. How about that?" Mom asked. "You want to do that?" I felt a little less sick now, almost entirely forgetting anything was wrong in the first place. Sure. I perked up. The timber tunnel was like any given theme park tunnel ride. A metal track, a roller coaster style cart, and a long tunnel the tracks lead into. The mouth of the tunnel bore flat plywood, trees, and a stand-up cutout of a burly lumberjack that looked like it had been left out in the rain for about a century. It was faded and worn, most of its facial features missing aside from a thick beard. I got into the cart at about the back. Other kids were already piling in, and there was a real sense that I might get shoved or kicked if I tried to work my way in any sooner than I did. The round woman was standing by the cart, making sure everyone was safe and secure by manhandling them to see if they'd come loose from the cart. Nearby, 2 people in a less than convincing 2-man unicorn costume pranced and trotted around, the lead man making whining and snorting sounds. Next to me in the cart was a dweeby kid with Coke bottle glasses and a green and white striped shirt. He had a blob of snot rolling down his upper lip, which he would continually snort back up as he looked around in wonder. If this kid smiled any wider, his head would have fallen off. When the round woman finally worked her way to the back of the cart, she jerked and jostled me roughly. Her hands darted from my arms to my chest to my leg and bumping my crotch in the way that gave me a fleeting feeling of extreme unease. It happened so quickly that she was already moving on before I could even croak out a word. And with that, the cart was off. All the kids waved to their parents, who waved back again. My hands were on the metal bar that held the kids in place. As I stared towards my parents, still dumbfounded by what just happened. Mom and Dad waved, their look of happiness turning to concern over my appearance just as I disappeared into the tunnel. After this all happened, all I wanted to do was forget the song. Lumberjack Dan, clearing all the trees, working on the land. Lumberjack Dan, hard day's work for a lumberjack man. It issued from unseen speakers over and over again with no variation. It was set way too loud, and a couple of kids ahead of me clasped their hands over their ears. Most just laughed, and one said, it's not too bad. You guys are just silly. We passed painted scenes of forest landscapes and little animatronic lumberjacks. They had about the same range of animation as that desktop drinking bird toy, and were about the same size. It was like being on a train in a miniature train set. As we rounded the curve, the song loop sped up, like the cassette tape was being played on fast forward. The screeching, high-pitched voice was ear-splitting. Now all the kids were covering their ears. I looked at the little mechanical people as we continued through the ride. They were moving faster, as well, blindingly fast, faster than a tiny tin toy should realistically be able to move without flying free or off their hinges. As we continued, the lumberjacks were cutting other things, farm animals, people. Tiny lumberjacks had moved into small settlements of log cabins and were relentlessly, internally hacking away at tiny field people. Blood spurts made of red metal wire jiggled this way and that as the torturous murders commenced. The lights went out. The song still played. Still way too fast and way too loud. I felt my pants getting wet. The cart shook. It shook with increasing severity, like someone jostling the front of the car, then the middle working their way back. Suddenly something hit me in the jaw, very hard like an uppercut. I felt something lash my face as well. It was like being hit from underneath by a child's shoe, foot and all, with the laces following suit. It was almost like someone had flown past, while kicking out violently. Reeling from the shocking blow, I slipped beneath the safety bar and crumbled to the floor of the cart. I cried, but the music drowned the sound. I felt across the floor for help from the boy next to me, but I found only empty space from wall to wall within the cart. The music finally ceased and everything went deathly quiet. Sniveling in the dark, I remained quiet. I didn't even want to breathe deeply. I listened for any sign of where everyone had gone or why they left. All I heard was the sound like a restaurant full of customers obnoxiously slurping soup mixed with the absent, brainless chewing of a group of cattle. It wasn't loud, but in the darkness it seemed to echo all around me. The lights never came back on, but thankfully the cart had continued to move throughout this ordeal. Soon, I saw daylight. As I emerged from the other end of the tunnel, still hunched down on the floor and clutching my swollen jaw, when I realized I was most likely past the danger, or at least assumed I was. I boldly popped my head up out of the cart and looked around, the sunlight burning my unadjusted eyes. I was alone. I don't mean I was alone in the cart, though I was, but rather that there was absolutely nobody around. Not a single parent there to greet anyone coming off the ride. The cart was still moving when I rolled myself over the side and landed on the ground hard. I was frantic at this point, nearly crying. I moved as fast as I could through the grounds, making a beeline away from the timber tunnel and towards the long building at the front of the park. The petting zoo was empty except for the animals. Everything was empty. The game booth displayed unguarded prizes, and the other rides whirred and click-clacked with no passengers and no operators. As I moved through the arcade building, I made sure to stop at each row of cabinets to see if my parents had come in there. For some unknown reason, it was just as desolate as the rest of the place. When I reached the parking lot, that's when relief finally washed over me. There were my mom and dad, walking toward our car. The other parents were here as well, doing much the same. "Mom?" I called out. "Dad?" Nothing, not even a hesitation in their step. "Mom!" I repeated in a desperate tone. When I caught up with them, I slipped between them and took their hands again. They both gasped in shock and looked down at me as if some sort of otherworldly creature had suddenly grabbed onto them. "Hey," Mom said, almost as if she was remembering something from far away in the past. "Hey, where were you?" "Mom," I started bawling at this point. "Mom, I was in the tunnel. You left me in the tunnel. Where were you going, Mom?" "The tunnel?" she repeated, seeming mystified. The tunnel." Dad grinned at Mom. "We left him in the tunnel. He was making fun of me, acting like I wasn't making any sense, and like I was doing it on purpose. It made me so mad, I could actually hear my own pulse. Dad, you did." I never convinced them. To this day, I never convinced them of any of it. Well, even though we all got into the car and drove up that slope out of Whimsywood, 10 seconds later they acted like they never even heard of the place. They acted as if there had been no interruptions to the trip. Mom even said I dreamed it. We were right in the middle of talking about Whimsywood. She had just said it seemed like a nice place, even if it was a bit run down. In the next moment, she was talking about it being something I dreamt. I watched another car behind us that had just came up from the park as well, without the child that had been riding along less than an hour earlier. Out of the passenger side window came a stuffed rabbit, a juice cup, a coloring book. By the time we reached Arizona, the combinations of my parents' insistence that I dreamt it all, combined with the monotony of the remaining of the trip, had me worn down. I really started considering the idea hadn't been real. I almost had myself fooled until the trip home. On the way back, we passed the billboard signs again. Games, rides, animals, family fun, 25 miles ahead. Hey, look, Mom said. "You've been really good. Want to stop there on the way?" Much to her surprise, I declined.
Bah! then all of a sudden, it stopped. I heard a scratching again at the door. I knew who it was. It was the cat.